The morning sun cast long shadows across the private airfield outside Los Angeles, where a gleaming Gulfstream G650 waited on the tarmac. Its polished exterior reflected the early light, emblazoned with a discreet logo that few would recognize as belonging to one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. The plane represented luxury that most could only dream of, yet the man approaching it looked nothing like its multi-million-dollar owner. He walked unhurriedly across the tarmac, dressed in worn jeans, scuffed boots, and a simple black t-shirt that had seen better days. His beard was slightly unkempt, his long dark hair tucked behind his ears, and a weathered backpack hung from one shoulder. Nothing about him screamed wealth or importance. To the casual observer, he might have been mistaken for a member of the ground crew rather than the man who signed the checks. Among those watching his approach was Vanessa Mitchell, the lead flight attendant hired specifically for this private charter. She stood at attention near the aircraft steps, her crisp uniform perfectly pressed, not a single platinum blonde hair out of place. Her eyes narrowed as she watched the disheveled man walking directly toward her plane. What happened next would leave everyone completely speechless. Vanessa had been working in luxury aviation for 8 years, and she prided herself on maintaining the highest standards. Her clients were typically executives, oil magnates, and occasionally celebrities who expected nothing short of perfection. Today's flight was particularly important. She'd been told a special VIP and his production team were traveling to Vancouver to begin filming a major motion picture. The opportunity to impress someone of this caliber could open doors to more elite contracts. The private airfield hummed with the usual pre-flight activities. Ground crews moved methodically around various aircraft, performing final checks. The distinct smell of jet fuel mingled with the fresh morning air. In the distance, another private jet roared to life, its engines disrupting the relative calm. Two impeccably dressed men stood near the Gulfstream stairs, checking items on tablets. Producers, Vanessa assumed, from their professional attire and focused demeanor. And then there was him, the disheveled man in the worn clothes who continued approaching with unhurried confidence. "Excuse me," Vanessa called out as he neared the aircraft steps. "This is a private charter. The passenger loading area is in the main terminal." Her tone was polite but firm, the voice she reserved for redirecting lost travelers or overambitious paparazzi. The man stopped and looked up at her, dark eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "Good morning," he said, his voice unexpectedly gentle and deep. "Beautiful day for flying." Something about his calm demeanor momentarily threw her off balance, but Vanessa quickly recovered. "Sir, you'll need to head back to the terminal. This aircraft is preparing for a private departure." The man nodded thoughtfully, as though considering her words. "I understand. Is Captain Thomas aboard yet? I wanted to discuss the flight path with him." Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together. This wasn't the reaction she expected from someone who had wandered into the wrong area. Most people immediately apologized and retreated. The fact that he knew the captain's name was concerning. Perhaps he was more than just lost. Security issues were rare but not unheard of in private aviation. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the aircraft," she said more firmly. "Security will escort you back to the terminal." One of the well-dressed men looked up from his tablet and began walking toward them. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, his eyes moving between Vanessa and the scruffy man. "This gentleman was just leaving," Vanessa replied confidently. The newcomer's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Reeves, good morning. We weren't expecting you for another 30 minutes. Vanessa felt the blood drain from her face as the name registered. "Reeves, as in Keanu Reeves?" She looked more carefully at the man in the worn jeans and t-shirt, finally recognizing the famous face partially obscured by the casual beard, the man who reportedly owned this very aircraft. "Morning, David," Keanu replied with a nod. Traffic was lighter than expected. His eyes drifted back to Vanessa, not unkindly, but with quiet attention. David gestured toward the aircraft. "Everything's prepared for departure. The rest of the team will be arriving shortly." He glanced at Vanessa with a look that clearly communicated she had made a significant error. "Mr. Reeves," Vanessa began, her voice suddenly tight. "I deeply apologize for the misunderstanding. Please allow me to welcome you aboard." Keanu adjusted his backpack strap and offered a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No problem at all," he said. "It happens." As he climbed the steps into the aircraft, Vanessa stood frozen in place, mortification washing over her in waves. She had just attempted to remove Keanu Reeves, Hollywood icon and her employer for the day, from his own airplane. The interior of the Gulfstream was a masterpiece of understated luxury. Cream leather seats, polished wood surfaces, and ambient lighting created an atmosphere of calm sophistication. Keanu settled into one of the forward seats, placing his worn backpack beside him. He pulled out a dog-eared paperback book, Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, and began reading quietly. Vanessa moved through her pre-flight duties with mechanical precision, her mind racing as she tried to process her colossal mistake. In all her years of service, she had never misidentified a client so dramatically. Her job now felt precarious at best. Each time she passed Keanu, she felt a renewed surge of embarrassment. After completing the safety checks, she steeled herself and approached him. "Mr. Reeves, would you care for a beverage before takeoff?" He looked up from his book, his expression thoughtful rather than annoyed. "Just water would be great, thank you." The simplicity of his request contrasted sharply with the typical demands of her high-profile clients. No specific imported spring water, no particular glass, no exact temperature requirements. As the rest of the production team boarded, a director, 2 assistant producers, and a cinematographer, Vanessa noted how differently they carried themselves. They wore designer clothes, checked expensive watches, and immediately asked for specific brands of sparkling water and coffee preparations. Their requests came with an air of entitlement that made Keanu's modest demeanor all the more striking. "The usual macchiato, Miss Mitchell," said one producer, not bothering to look up from his phone. "And make sure it's actually hot this time." "Right away, Mr. A. Dawson," she replied with a professional smile, acutely aware that Keanu was observing the interaction. As she prepared the coffee in the galley, she could hear the production team discussing budget concerns for the Vancouver shoot. One voice rose above the others, frustrated about accommodation costs. "I mean, do we really need to put the stunt team in 5-star hotels? They're just going to be sleeping between shoots anyway." Vanessa returned with the macchiato and couldn't help noticing that Keanu had closed his book and was listening intently to the conversation. When there was a pause, he spoke up. "The stunt team puts their bodies on the line every day," he said quietly. "They deserve comfort and rest between those demands." The producer, who had been complaining, looked somewhat taken aback. "Of course, Keanu. I was just thinking about the bottom line." "Sometimes the bottom line isn't the most important line," Keanu replied, his tone gentle but firm. The cabin fell silent for a moment. Vanessa, standing nearby with a tray of drinks, was struck by how effectively he had redirected the conversation without raising his voice or showing anger. There was a quiet authority in his simplicity that her other high-maintenance clients could never achieve with their demands and displays of wealth. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Vanessa found herself increasingly fascinated by the disconnect between Keanu's unassuming presence and the luxury that surrounded him. Here was a man who could afford everything, but seemed attached to nothing except his worn backpack and paperback philosophy book. Once they reached cruising altitude, the tension in Vanessa's shoulders began to ease slightly. Perhaps she could salvage this situation after all. She moved efficiently through the cabin, attending to the various needs of the production team while trying to anticipate what Keanu might want before he had to ask. "Miss Mitchell," called Mr. Dawson, the producer with the macchiato demands, "this coffee is lukewarm. Is it really so difficult to serve a properly hot beverage?" Vanessa suppressed a sigh. "I apologize, Mr. Dawson. I'll prepare a fresh one immediately. And make sure the foam is actually dense this time. Whatever you did last time made it dissipate almost immediately." His tone was dismissive, his attention already returning to his laptop. As she turned to head back to the galley, she nearly collided with Keanu, who had risen from his seat. "I was just going to stretch my legs a bit," he explained with a small smile. "Mind if I join you in the galley for a minute? I could use a refill on water." "Of course, Mr. Reeves," she replied, surprised by the request. In the galley, as she prepared a fresh macchiato, Keanu leaned casually against the counter, watching the clouds through the small window. "How long have you been doing this work?" he asked, his question seeming genuinely curious rather than merely polite conversation. 8 years with private aviation, Vanessa answered, measuring the espresso carefully. Before that, commercial airlines for 3 years. He nodded thoughtfully. That's dedication. Do you enjoy it? The question caught her off guard. Most clients never asked about her experience or satisfaction. Most days, she admitted, though some are more challenging than others. A knowing look crossed his face. I imagine the people can make or break the experience. You could say that, she replied cautiously, steaming the milk for the macchiato. I've noticed something over the years, Keanu said, his voice lowering slightly as though sharing a confidence. The people who demand the most respect are often the ones who deserve it least. The truly secure ones don't need to announce their importance. Vanessa's hands stilled momentarily as his words resonated with her own unspoken observations. She had served billionaires who treated her like furniture and struggling musicians who showed profound gratitude for a simple cup of coffee. That's very insightful, Mr. Reeves. Keanu, please, he corrected gently. She nodded, feeling some of her professional armor softening despite her best efforts to maintain it. Keanu, the coffee smells great, he commented, changing the subject. You clearly know what you're doing. Thank you. It's a skill I've developed over time. Exactly, he said, his expression brightening. Skills, knowledge, kindness, those are the things that matter, not the brand of watch or the cost of shoes. He glanced down at his own worn boots with a slight smile. As Vanessa completed the perfect macchiato, she found herself wondering how different her job would be if more clients possessed Keanu's perspective. The small galley suddenly felt like an island of authenticity in a sea of pretense. You know, Keanu continued, I learned something important from a taxi driver in New York once. He told me, in my country, we say the real measure of a person isn't how they treat the important people, it's how they treat the unimportant ones. He paused. Not that anyone is actually unimportant. Before Vanessa could respond, Mr. Dawson's voice carried from the cabin. Did that coffee evaporate, Miss Mitchell? Or are you growing the beans yourself back there? Keanu raised an eyebrow but said nothing, simply taking his water glass and returning to his seat. Vanessa followed with the macchiato, presenting it to the impatient producer with her professional smile firmly back in place. Finally, Dawson muttered, taking a sip. This is acceptable. From the corner of her eye, Vanessa saw Keanu return to his book, but not before giving her a small nod of solidarity. The flight continued without incident for the next hour. The production team discussed casting decisions and location permits while Keanu alternately read his book and gazed out the window. Vanessa moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, though she found herself increasingly conscious of the stark difference between Keanu's behavior and that of his colleagues. When she offered a selection of gourmet snacks, the producers examined each option critically, asking about ingredients and preparation methods. Keanu simply thanked her and selected a simple fruit plate, eating quietly while reviewing what appeared to be script notes. Mr. Reeves, called out Dawson eventually, we should discuss the Vancouver schedule. The equipment is arriving a day later than planned, which complicates things. Keanu closed his notes and joined the discussion, his focus complete and attentive. Vanessa, arranging items in the galley, overheard the conversation that followed. We'll need to adjust the shooting schedule, said the director, a serious woman named Eleanor. The permit for the harbor scene is only valid for Tuesday and Wednesday. Can we expedite the equipment? Keanu asked. Dawson shook his head. Not without significant additional cost. We're already over budget on transportation. What if we charter a cargo plane specifically for the equipment? Keanu suggested. I know it's an additional expense, but it would keep the entire crew from sitting idle for a day. Dawson looked uncomfortable. That's a considerable expense for a schedule convenience. It's not just convenience, Keanu replied calmly. It's respecting everyone's time. The crew has committed to these dates. Making them all wait around unpaid because we didn't plan properly isn't right. Eleanor nodded in agreement. He has a point, Brian. The goodwill we'd lose would cost more in the long run. Easy for you to say, Dawson muttered. It's not your money. The cabin fell silent. Vanessa, who had emerged from the galley with fresh towels, froze in place. The comment had clearly crossed a line, and everyone knew it. Keanu's expression remained unchanged, but something in his eyes shifted. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, requiring everyone to lean in slightly to hear him. Actually, Brian, it is my money. I'm financing 40% of this project, as I believe you know. He paused, letting the words settle. But even if I weren't, I'd make the same recommendation. Treating people with respect isn't a line item you cut to save the bottom line. It's the foundation everything else is built on. Dawson's face flushed red. I know you didn't, Keanu interrupted, his tone free of anger. That's why we're having this conversation now, privately, instead of in front of the crew in Vancouver. He looked around at the others. Let's charter the cargo plane. I'll cover it personally if needed. Eleanor smiled. That's very generous, Keanu, he shrugged. Not really. It's just the right thing to do. As the conversation moved on to other logistics, Vanessa found herself replaying his words in her mind. In all her years of serving the ultra-wealthy, she had rarely witnessed someone with so much use their position to advocate for those with less, especially when it cost them personally. The contrast with her earlier judgment of him based on his appearance made her increasingly uncomfortable. As they passed the halfway point of the flight, mild turbulence interrupted the smooth journey. The seatbelt sign illuminated, and Vanessa moved through the cabin, ensuring everything was secure. When she reached Keanu's row, she noticed he was helping the cinematographer, an older man named Gerald, stow his expensive camera equipment. Wouldn't want this getting damaged, Keanu said, carefully securing the case. Your eye through this lens is what makes everything else possible. Gerald, who had barely spoken during the flight, looked genuinely touched. Most actors don't appreciate what happens behind the camera. Most actors aren't seeing the whole picture then, Keanu replied with a small smile at his own pun. The exchange was brief but illuminating. Vanessa realized that Keanu's modest demeanor wasn't an act or an affectation. It was simply who he was. The man owned the multi-million-dollar aircraft they were flying in, was bankrolling a significant portion of the film they were making, and yet he spoke to the cinematographer as though Gerald's contribution was more valuable than his own. As she secured the galley for the turbulence, Vanessa couldn't help reflecting on her initial interaction with him on the tarmac. She had been so quick to dismiss him based on his appearance, so confident in her assessment of who belonged and who didn't. The memory now made her cringe. When the turbulence subsided, she found Keanu standing in the aisle, stretching his back. Mr. Reeves, Keanu, she corrected herself. May I get you anything else? He considered for a moment. Actually, I'd love a cup of tea if it's not too much trouble. Of course, any preference. Whatever you recommend, he said with a genuine smile that reached his eyes this time. As she prepared a selection of premium teas in the galley, she decided to approach what had been weighing on her mind. When she returned with a tray offering several options, she took a deep breath. I want to apologize properly for what happened before boarding, she said, keeping her voice low. I made an assumption based on your appearance, and it was unprofessional and unkind. Keanu selected a chamomile tea and looked at her with surprising warmth. There's nothing to apologize for. You were doing your job. No, she insisted quietly. I wasn't just doing my job. I was making a judgment about who you were based on what you were wearing. That goes beyond professional duty into personal prejudice. He nodded, acknowledging her honesty. We all do it, you know. Make snap judgments based on appearances. The trick is being willing to revise those judgments when we get new information. He paused, steeping his tea. The problem isn't having first thoughts. It's stopping there and never getting to the second or third thoughts. His response contained no trace of resentment, which somehow made Vanessa feel even more remorseful. Still, I should have been more respectful in how I approached you. Can I share something with you? Keanu asked, his voice thoughtful. Of course. I find that dressing this way helps me see people more clearly. He gestured to his simple attire. When I'm recognized instantly, I get a certain kind of treatment. When I'm not, I see a different side of people. Both are revealing in their own way. Vanessa considered this perspective, so my reaction was, Informative? A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Let's just say it wasn't unexpected. He took a sip of tea. This is excellent, by the way. Thank you, she replied, still processing his words. You know what's interesting? He continued. When I'm dressed like this, service workers often treat me with more genuine humanity than when I'm recognizable as Keanu Reeves. They let their guard down. They're real. This observation struck Vanessa deeply. How often had she modified her behavior based on the perceived importance of a client? How often had she been more authentically herself with those she deemed less significant? That's quite profound, she admitted. Keanu shrugged. Just something I've noticed. In the end, all the external stuff, the clothes, the possessions, even this plane, none of it matters much. What matters is how we treat each other along the way. Before Vanessa could respond, Dawson approached from the front of the cabin. Keanu, sorry to interrupt, but we need to finalize the press schedule for the Vancouver arrival. Be right there, Keanu replied. He turned back to Vanessa. Thanks for the tea and for the honest conversation. As he moved away to join the producers, Vanessa remained standing in the aisle, the empty tray in her hands, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of success and significance. The flight began its descent into Vancouver, the sprawling city coming into view beneath scattered clouds. The production team packed away their materials, and Vanessa prepared the cabin for landing. The earlier tension had dissipated, replaced by a focused anticipation of the work ahead. Dawson, who had been somewhat subdued following his exchange with Keanu, approached Vanessa as she collected final items before landing. Miss Mitchell, he began, his tone noticeably different from earlier. I wanted to apologize for my behavior regarding the coffee. It was unnecessarily demanding and, well, rude. Surprised by this unexpected apology, Vanessa temporarily lost her professional veneer. Thank you, Mr. Dawson. I appreciate that. He glanced toward Keanu, who was helping Gerald again with his camera equipment. Sometimes we need a reminder about what actually matters, he said, more to himself than to her. With a nod, he returned to his seat. After they landed and taxied to a private terminal, Vanessa opened the aircraft door and lowered the steps. Outside, a small group of vehicles waited on the tarmac, production cars for the team, and what appeared to be fans who had somehow learned of Keanu's arrival, despite the private nature of the flight. One by one, the production team disembarked, nodding their thanks to Vanessa as they passed. Keanu was the last to leave, pausing at the door with his worn backpack slung over one shoulder. Thank you for a smooth flight, he said, offering his hand. What was your name again? I'm sorry I didn't ask earlier. Vanessa Mitchell. He shook her hand firmly. Thank you, Vanessa. I appreciate your service and your honesty. It was my pleasure, truly, she replied, meaning it sincerely for perhaps the first time that day. I learned a lot. A slight smile crossed his face. Me too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to her. A small token of appreciation. Before she could respond, he had descended the steps and was walking toward the waiting vehicles. Rather than getting into the production car directly, he stopped to greet the small group of fans, signing autographs and posing for photos with genuine warmth. Vanessa opened the envelope after he had gone. Inside was a generous tip, as she had expected, but also a handwritten note. The measure of wealth isn't what we have, but what we give. Thanks for the reminder that appearances rarely tell the whole story, on both sides of the equation. Safe travels, Keanu. Standing in the doorway of the empty plane, his plane, Vanessa watched as Keanu's car pulled away. The man who owned a private jet but carried a worn backpack. The Hollywood star who dressed like a crew member. The wealthy celebrity who advocated for those with less. In an industry where she had become accustomed to equating worth with appearance, Keanu Reeves had shown her a different standard of measurement. One that had nothing to do with designer clothes or luxury possessions, and everything to do with how you treat the people around you, especially those who can do nothing for you in return. As she prepared the aircraft for its return journey, Vanessa tucked the note carefully into her uniform pocket. A reminder that true wealth and importance often look nothing like we expect them to, and that the most valuable things can't be seen at all. 3 months later, Vanessa stood on another tarmac, greeting passengers for another private charter. As a group of executives approached in their tailored suits and polished shoes, she found herself looking beyond the obvious markers of status, searching instead for the quiet indicators of character that she had learned to recognize. And when a casually dressed woman approached the plane separately from the others, Vanessa smiled warmly and said, "Good morning. Welcome aboard. How may I assist you today?" Because now she understood what Keanu Reeves had tried to show her all along, that importance isn't something you wear on the outside, but something you carry within. And that sometimes, the wealthiest people in the room are the ones who need to prove it least. The woman, who turned out to be the CEO of the company chartering the flight, later commented to the pilots about the exceptional service she had received. "Your flight attendant treated me with genuine respect from the moment I arrived," she said. "Not because of my position, but simply because I was a person. That's increasingly rare these days." The captain smiled knowingly. That's Vanessa, how she learned from the best. And somewhere over the Pacific, in a modestly dressed man reading philosophy in a private jet he rarely mentioned owning, the lesson continued to fly.